Hey everyone, uh, let's see if you're able to hear me. Yes, okay, the voice is okay. So far we created an NX monorepo, we created one app, we also added one library called home. Uh, there is nothing inside that so far, but we also, yesterday what we did is we added Angular material to our workspace, and then this is what we ended up with, right? So we have some links which does not work, of course. I mean, you can see, hey Kaushal, these links are just like, okay, there are some navigations, that's it. We'll make it work. And then there is app bar, right? This is what we call it. And we also saw that this is responsive, so of course I can use it on mobile and it will still work, right? So you can open, close the menu, and this is all available because we just used Angular material, and then we used the navigation schematic to make it work. So today what we will do is we will, as we said, we will be creating an e-commerce app. So we need some products, right? I mean, of course, we need to have some products, and we are not going to write our own backend, not yet. I mean, maybe in future, if I get some time, probably. I want to learn Next.js. I mean, I have like done Next.js like many years ago, and I want to do that again. So probably we'll write our APIs using Next.js. But for this one, I'm going to use a fake API. So this is the API, fake store API, thanks to my friend Sergey, who actually introduced me to this APIs. So I know this exists, and it has like categories. Then you can add a new product to a category in case you want to update a product. So we are just mostly going to get the data, right? So we have get categories, sort result. Maybe we can, if we can give filters, limit result. I mean, we can also show how many result we want to. It may be good use case for pagination. Get a single product in case we want to have one product, and there are get all products as well. So if you see, this is the array of all products, and the first API call which we are going to do today is known as categories, right? So because we need all these categories, and probably will display it here, these all links will be via this API. So let's see the output of this category. It actually doesn't look like much. I mean, just it's just an array of string, right? So we have to, whenever you work with API, you have to like know the contract, right? How the input and output looks like. So here we have to just call this API, and then it will return me the array of string, which is this. And then whenever you want to get the product for a specific category, there is a API. So you can see this. I have to pass category slash. So those categories will be here. So click, let's say I click on jewelry, and I get all the product related to jewelry. And let's see the output. So this is the output. So this is the products which will be rendered. So let's go ahead and implement this, right? So, but we are going to use NgRx. Okay. So if you are not aware what NgRx is a state management framework for Angular. And let's see, let's go to the documentation. So the two lab, the two packages which we are going to use from NgRx is NgRx store and effects. We'll not use component store. Component store is again a very great API or great package. Maybe we can do it later, or we can see some use cases at some point of time. But as I'm going to save this categories in my global store, I mean, it should be available across. NGRX component store is something which can be good use case for local store. I mean, in case a component wants to have its own state, we can go ahead and use component store. But here, as we need the data to be available across my global store, I mean, I'm going to use NGRX store, and then to get or fetch the data, we need to make some API calls, which we generally do using effects. So these two packages which we'll be using. But let's talk a little bit about NGRX, right? Why we need NGRX. So in case your application grows and you have a lot of data like flying around, it at one point of time it becomes very hard to understand how your data flows in your application, which can lead to unwanted errors or unwanted performance issues, right? For example, someone who has already written some method to get some data, but you are not aware of it because there is no common place where you can see if this data exists or not. And then you just keep calling the same APIs again and again. And at the end, you see, okay, you are making similar calls or same calls multiple times, even though you don't need it. You might have actually just called it once and then save the data into store, and that's it. But that's not what we end up doing. So think of store as a database, right? So think of this store. Let's talk about this diagram. This is which is very great work by Jordan, who did this diagram first. So if I talk about a store, let's think of it as a database. So this is the database where all the data which you update or select or even save is actually available on in this database. So this is not actual database. We are just like, this is a metadata where, or metadata, or you can call this is an interface which has all the information about your whatever data exists in your application. And whenever you want to get some data, you have to actually go to this store and then say, okay, give me this data. You, if you want to add something to your store, you have to actually push some data into this store. If you want to update something, you have to update the data into this store as well. And the way to do it is via selector and action. So action is something which, let's say, if I want to get categories, right? I mean, that's an action. If I want to add a new product, that's an action. So all the operations which you perform, you can think of that as an action. And once you perform an action, it will I mean, the actions will go and do something with your store. I mean, either they update the store, or they get or they like delete data from your store, or they just read the data from your store, right? I mean, to read the data, not read the data, but actually that's part of selectors. But yeah, I mean, if you want to push something, you want to update something, that's something which you will do using actions. Or you want to fetch some data, right, from, for example, here, get categories, that's also something which will achieve using action. Think of selectors as your queries. I'm sure everyone might have actually learned about SQL, or I hope they still teach it, right? I'm in databases in colleges. So in databases, in case you want to read some data from your tables, what to do? You write queries. So think of this selectors, which is here, as the queries. And whenever you want to get data, you will just write a selector, which is in turn is a query. So let's go ahead and see. Let's go ahead and add this NgRx store and effects. And how we'll do it is, uh, right now we have this add navigation feature branch, which is available here. So I'll create a new branch. So I'll create a new branch based on this. So because once you move to this new branch, you should get the previous code as well. And I'll just keep the main as empty. So everyone who takes the main is like, uh, it's a starting point, right? Where you, from where you can start writing your code. So win-win for everyone. So let's say I'll create a new branch. I'll say feature, add NgRx, and NX has actually its own selector. So you can see you can actually add an NgRx root store for an application, and you can add an NgRx feature store to an application or library. So what should we do? I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, should I go ahead and use this available schematics, or should I write my own? So I'll go with my own, because of course many of you might not have actually used NgRx. Once you are like, once you know how to do it like from hand, like manually, I think after that I can go ahead and actually use this schematics. It makes more sense in that case, right? Because you are already aware of everything. So to add this NGRX store, what I will do is I will create another library and I will add all those files which is needed. But first step first, we need to install NGRX. So as we need two libraries, I'll just go ahead and add them both. let me just stop the server. So, and let's open the terminal here because I think it will be more visible because this is the font size is really big. So what we want to add is NgRx store and NgRx effects, and we are using, if I'm not wrong, npm. Yes, we are using npm. So let's go back to the documentation. So there are a few installation steps which is available here. So you can see you can add, you can do this ng-add ngrx store at latest in case of you are using Angular CLI. We are not using Angular CLI. Uh, we are using NgRx. So the first thing which we have to do is install npm using npm, right? So I'll say, okay, go ahead and do npm install ngrx store, save. Which cursor you're talking about? So I'm just confused. Which cursor? Yeah, you mentioned it yesterday. I asked you to actually just drop me a message on uh, LinkedIn or Twitter, so I should know which cursor is that. You mean the mouse cursor you're talking about? This is lagging. I hope so. I think yeah, you're talking about the same. I think it's my laptop probably. So yeah, okay, I understood now. Understood. So this cursor is, I'm sure this is my laptop. I'll try to see how I can handle this. So I just installed the NGRX store. So you can see uh, right now npm install NGRX store and then it is installed. So if I go to what has changed, so we should have NGRX store available in our package.json. And now we have to actually add this store somewhere, right? So let's start with our library. So I'll create a new library. I'll go to generate and I'll say a library. And as I said, I mean, last time we set this to buildable. So it's by default buildable. And library name, let's name this as category because this is related to category, right? So my library name is category. Let's create this. Cannot create, it already exists. Somehow it's created. Okay, so we have this category and then what we'll do is we'll get rid of this category module, right? And we need few things. I mean, uh, the first thing, sorry, we need to create few files. So which we will not do manually. We can actually use NGRX to create those files for us. So let's go back to the documentation. I mean, documentation is the best, your should be your primary point. So whenever you are writing a new code, let's say you learn something new here about NGRX, but in future you decide to write some code, I would suggest go ahead and revisit the documentation because I mean, things change, right? I mean, over the period of time, probably some APIs might have changed. So always refer to your documentation. So, okay, with installation, we have this, and then it also does some manual configuration, some automation for us. So if you add this, I mean, if you have an Angular CLI project and you do this ng-add ngrx store uh, here, right? So ng-add ngrx store, it will do some automation. So it will update your package.json, it will install it will install ngrx store, and then it will update the app module. It will update the app module, and then uh, it will add store module for root. If you are using standalone, so in our case we are using standalone app, right? So we have to add this provide store into our application config. So if you remember last time we spoke about a file. So we spoke about a file which is app config here. So inside app we have app config.ts. So it is saying that in case you are using standalone app, go ahead and add provide store here. So right now I don't have any state. So I'll say, okay, this is provide store. And as soon as you do that, if it will auto import, right? So you can see provide store is available here. And then uh, as as of now, let's see what we can pass. So I'll say this is category, and what is the next parameter? So we have to pass feature name, and then we have to pass reducer. So you can pass reducer. But the first thing is we have to create them, right? We have to understand what reducer is, and let's keep it empty. So I'll say reducer. As of now, I'll just null should be no, it doesn't work. So I think it should be okay. So without any reducer. So we have our state, which is category, which is my root state, probably because category should be available for everyone. So that's why I'm saving it in root, but we can see move this to feature. I mean, that's something which we'll do later on, but right now we just want to add this provide state here. We can also keep it empty if you don't want to. I mean, if we don't want to have anything into our root state, we can just keep it empty. So we can create all the files which is needed for a specific feature, right? Let's do that way. Let's try to do that way because I'm also trying NgRx after a long time. uh, so this is mandatory. This step is required so to make your NgRx store work. And we also need the NgRx effects. So we'll do the same. So as we are into NgRx monorepo, we'll just like do it manually. So we have to install NgRx effects. Let's go to console. Somehow, I mean, somehow my cursor is a little bit better now, I think, Kaushal. It's not lagging anymore, but I saw it. I mean, it was lagging when I run some command. So when I run npm install, because I use Windows. So let's add NgRx effects, and then for effects also we have API. So if I go back to the documentation, let's go back to the documentation and let's see the installation. So it says if the project is using a standalone bootstrap, it adds provide effects. So here we don't want to use the schematic, the default schematic. We want to actually write our own. So I'll say okay, provide effects, and we can keep it empty because we don't have any effects, or we don't have any root effects as of now. So we just did the configuration. That's what we have done so far, and we can verify if this changes still works, right? So let's do yarn, not a yarn, npm next serve, and then we can give our app name. So you can use console, or you can just write the command manually. I mean, as I said, go ahead and prefer NX console do, so you don't have to remember all these commands. We just want to verify that we did all the configuration correctly, and we have our uh, application still running with just basic configuration of NGRX store and effects. Let's see. Okay, something broke. So it says no provider for injection token, NGRX store, root store provider. So okay, that's something new, and it is coming from main.ts. Why? So we have provide effects, provide store. Let's see. Index, not here. src main.ts, and yeah, so it is complaining here. So provide store, provide effects, no provider for injection token, and NgRx root store provider. Do I need to provide reducers. Hmm. So as per documentation, it should work just like this. Providers provide store, providers array, provide store. Okay. So my bad, right? So I just used the wrong API here. Provide store is the API which we want to use, and we can then get rid of this. We can just leave this as blank. So I missed writing documentation probably. It is provide store. Yeah, it was provide store. I just did the autocomplete thing. So our application is still working fine. I mean, after adding NgRx store and NgRx effects and just adding them into our root. So we just configured it. We can also use Redux store to see all the actions which we make, or all the operations, you can say, which we make inside our application. So let's go ahead and create the actions, and then we also talk about those things, right? I mean, we have to create action, we have to create reducers, and then we have to create selectors. So let's go one by one. First thing, of course, we have to create actions. So actions are something which will define that operation we are going to perform. So there are two APIs which exist. For writing actions. So there is, of course, create action API, and then there is an new action API called create action group. So in case we have a lot of similar actions, we can actually go ahead and use create action group, which which probably, let's say, we'll talk about it later on. Let's start with the basics, right? I mean, let's start with the create action API. So create action API, where we will define what actions we are going to perform using this particular thing, or this particular action. So let's create those files. So here we already have a library, right? So let's write this first file. So I'll say this is category action dot ts. So we okay, dot, it's not generally so category dot action. And let's create our first action. So I'll say const uh, category action is equal to create action. And then we can define, like, this is string and this is your parameters. So in case you want to pass some parameter, you can actually do that. But for our action, we actually don't need any parameter. So I'll just add missing function, missing import. So I can say import from NgRx store, and we need create action API, and then we want to create the first action, and we'll call it as, okay, I just had so you can say category, and then I'll say this is get categories. So this is the action which we created, and we have to export this. Right. So we created our first action. So whenever we want to actually get the categories, we can actually call this action. That's it. What else? So we now got the actions. Next thing which we need is a reducer. So what is a reducer? Now we know that we talked a little bit about actions, that okay, actions are the operations which we need to perform, like get categories, in case we have products, get uh, what you can say, yeah, add product, delete product, those are your actions. And then what actions do? They update your store in some way, but you cannot just go ahead and directly update the store. So store's update has to be immutable, right? So immutable means you have to make sure that once you update the store, you actually create a new object and put that into store. You just don't directly modify the store. Let me give you an example of using TypeScript, what you mean by immutable. So let's say I have an array. So I'll say this is let array names. equals to say we have these two records, right? So if I want to add a new record into this array, I just cannot do this. So I cannot use array.push, and I cannot just have another record, right? So I cannot just say Shravan. So this is like I'm mutating the record, and I should always have a new record rather than actually mutating the old object. To do this, I mean, in TypeScript or JavaScript, to create a new object, we generally do this. So we can say, okay, array names is equals to dot array names, and then I can add this. So this is the way uh, in which we just don't directly mutate the object. We create a new object whenever we want to update the store. But who handles this? So this is where reducers come into the picture. So reducers are actually generally a pure function which takes the same input and gives you the same output. So they don't do anything else. They will take your action. They will perform some uh, perform some operation based on your action and update the store. That's what they do. So let's comment this out. I'll keep this as it is just for the reference. So let's create the reducer. I'll say this is category dot reducer dot ps. And to create reducer, you of course you also have APIs. So you have create reducer API to create the reducer. So in reducer, we will handle the actions. So first thing, of course, let's go ahead and do export const, and I'll call this as category create reducer. And then in create reducer, the first parameter which we have is type of initial data. I mean, it needs the initial value for your store. So what we are going to save here. So for my categories, what are the data which is important to us? So we need the list of categories, right? I mean, so let's create our um, so first let's import whatever we need. We also need this action. Let's import this, and we need to create an interface like which will have all the information related to this category. So what information this interface can hold? Let's create that. So and say this is interface category state. So we need categories. Of course, this is the categories which we'll get from once you make the API call. We need current category because once you select on navigation, you need to know which is the current category. So based on this category, we have to get the data. So this two information is enough to get started with. Okay. And here we have to define an initial state. In initial state, we'll say, okay, category is blank and current category is nothing. So we got this initial state. We'll pass this as first parameter. And then based on the action, we will handle this categories. So based on this action, category action, which is actually get categories, we get some data. And let's and this is where we will do some operation, right? So what we are supposed to do here is we are once we get the categories, we are supposed to update the store with the current categories. So I'll say, okay, once we get the data, give me, I mean, so this should not be state dot. So, okay, this is okay. So state categories, this should be state dot categories if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So get categories, do we think, I mean, do we need to do here? I mean, yeah. So get categories, I don't think so we need to handle here, but what we need to handle here is we will create one more action, which is So generally, when we have API call in between, right? So this category action, just think like this category action is going to make an API call. So we cannot make an API call from our reducer. This is where we are going to need an effect. So we'll write the effect. But before that, let's think about all the possible scenarios, right? When we make an API call, what can happen? API call can succeed. It means we get the categories. An API call can get failed, right? It means we don't get the categories. So there are three scenarios. Like first, you make a call to the API, which is like first action. Then, in case you get the data, you make you that's the another action, right? Where you have the data and then you update your store with the data. And the third scenario is where you make a call but you don't get the data. So in that case, you get an error. So it means in my initial state, I should also have the error. In case I get some error, I should have it here as well to display this to my end user, right? So let's create the second action. So I'll say, okay, this is category action success. And we do the same thing. So we'll pass get categories success. And then in case I get these categories, I push these categories into, into my, or I take this categories as a parameter and then put it into my store. So this is my first action, sorry, second action, and then we have a failure. So I say, okay, in case this is something fails, just go ahead and add that into, or just update the error, right? So we got three actions out of this. Let's import those two actions here, failure and success. So as I said, this action will not be handled here with the get category. So we'll say category success. So in case it is success, we will get this, and now it should be action dot categories. And we also should make sure that in case there are any errors, I just make it empty. My second is failures, right? So second scenario is failure, and then in this case, I should go ahead and update my store again with error as error, and I should make categories as empty. So these are two operations or two actions which will be handled by my reducer to update the store, the final store which we have. And now we have action reducer. What we need is, if you talk about just NgRx, we need a third file for queries, for querying the data, right? If I need all these categories, I need to actually query the data so I get all the categories. Or if I need errors, I mean, I need to query my store to get the errors. So let's go ahead and create the selector. So I'll say this is category selector .ps. And here, let's const. First is, so let's go to the documentation again, because to create selector, the first thing is, of course, you have to select the state, right? So here, if you see, the first thing which we create is we create or create a selector for a feature. So here I'm saying, okay, let's create const select. Mhm. Select category, right? And we create feature selector. We don't have to do this. I think we can just say import from /. We have defined our interfaces in reducer, so we need this, and we need the interface. So I'll say, okay, this is category reducer, as well as I don't need category reducer here. So I just need the interface. So I have to say export interface category state. So we can use category state here. And then we can say, okay, create feature selector, which is of course coming from NgRx store. And we can say, okay, category state, and we can call it as category. So let's see. Create selector, select feature, state dot feature, state. So this is for state. Let's follow the documentation. We can say state, category state, and then it returns the state. Create feature selector, I think we can use in case we have our feature store we don't have right now. So this is something which we'll be adding it in our global store. So I can say export, and then we need for one for category. So I can say select categories, which returns the categories, and we can have one for error. If you're thinking like how I'm getting all this autocomplete, I'm using GitHub Copilot. So of course, GitHub Copilot makes writing code very easy because it actually it's an AI, right? So it's an AI which sees like my coding pattern and then tries to figure out, okay, what should be the next code. So you can see I don't have to write much, which makes more sense in live streams, because if I have to type everything, it will take more time. So we got our queries as well. We can actually just go ahead and use this to get the information about categories or any error, or if you want to just have or get all the data inside the categories. We are missing one thing. We are missing the API call. So we have not made any API call so far. To make an API call, what we need? We need a service. We need an Angular service. So let's write the Angular service first, and let's see how we can use the service directly, and then we'll use the NgRx part, right? So let's create an service. So I'll say next generate and need to create an Angular service, and I call this service as category. So we'll also see how to make an API call from Angular. Project is missing. Of course, I have to pass project. Why it's not coming here? Okay, yes. So I'll just say this is lib, and then hyphen hyphen project equals to category. So I want to add this to category project. Okay, so we got our service, and what we need is to make an HTTP call. Angular has something known as HTTP service. So I can say private read only HTTP, and we use HTTP service, which should come from Angular common. So import enter it Angular slash common slash HTTP slash HTTP. And then we use the HTTP service, which is available here, HTTP. Just wondering what went wrong. HTTP client, and then what I want to do is I want to call the I want to get the categories. So here, if you think, I mean, let's take the API. So get all categories, and this is the API which we want. And we'll return this.http get. So here's this. Oh, okay. API public apis.org/categories. Okay, so this is some other API as well. But we need the this one. So fake store API. So we get all the categories from this API, and you can see the return type. It says observable of object. So we will not just go ahead and use observable of object. We need an interface of type this one. So if you see this categories, we said categories is of type string array. So it means once I make an API call, actually what I receive is array of string. So what we can do here is we can say HTTP get, and then we can say string array of string. So now whatever information we have will come as array of string. So we have this API call. Let's see, like we can just directly make an API call using this particular service. Let's see that first, right? I mean, we should know how to use services, and then we will add one extra layer. We will extract this service into an NgRx effects where we don't, or the developers, right? I mean, developers in our team don't interact directly with this particular service, this HTTP call. They always interact with our database, with our store which we have created. So first thing first, let's see this way. So we will import, as this is a library. So we have to export everything which supposed to be used outside. So right now I'm just going to use the service. So I'll just export this. And here in your app config, to make sure that you can make an HTTP call, you have to register something called as provide HTTP client. Uh, provide HTTP client. So make sure you don't miss this. Otherwise, whenever you make an HTTP call, it will fail. We can see that as well if just in few seconds. So we have our HTTP client, and then let's go ahead and use the service which we created just now. To use a service in Angular, with Angular 14, there is a new way which we can use, which is called as inject function. So to make to access this data, to access these categories, what I can do is I can just say categories equals to inject, and then here I can inject my service, which is category service, and I can say what happened. So, type any, no, like this. So we have category service coming from here. Okay, let's see angular.io. I think inject, what I'm missing here. So I can do inject function. Inject. Yeah, I'm doing the same, right? So I'm doing inject, and okay, field initializer. Okay, I can do it in constructor. Okay, I mean, I'm doing outside the constructor, right? So it should work. If, until unless I'm missing something. No, it's okay. It should work. So inject service and then dot py. Okay, because it's from the wrong API. It's Angular 4, if I'm not wrong. Let's see the import. So it's part of Angular core. So it was coming from Angular core testings for some reason. So this is the way you can do it. So there are two ways. I'll show you both in case if you have never written an Angular code. We can also do this same code using constructor injection. So I can say constructor, and then I can inject my service here, private read only category service, and then type of category service. And then I can use this service as categories equals to this dot category service dot get category. So this is two lines of code which we can do in case we want to. But Angular 14 onwards, we have this inject function available, which is really cool. I mean, which enables us to do a lot of things. And there is a way to test it as well. You saw that I was able to actually import something from Angular core testing. I have to still figure out how to write test for this, but this is the new way. In case you want to access any service, you can actually do this. So we can say inject service name dot method. So here, if you see this categories, is it's an observable of string. So in Angular, it actually returns a stream by default. I mean, so HTTP service returns a stream, but in future it is going to give us an option. I think it is already available if I'm not wrong, but we can also use with which okay, it's not available here. But in upcoming version, there will be option to use fetch API rather than just using RxJS. So that's something which will be available soon. But as of now, I mean, we have this option like HTTP client, and this particular get categories method, if you see, it returns something called observable of string. So what do you mean by observable? So observable is something which is like a stream of data. So it's rather than actually getting everything, you get a stream of data which which is always available in your application. I mean, it depends. I mean, if you end the stream, that's or your stream finishes, that's another thing. But here we are saying that it's a stream of data, stream of information which is coming. So to denote those, we actually just use something known as dollar to denote that okay, this particular value which is coming is not an object, right? Normal object. It's a stream of object. So here we are just using categories dollar, right, to denote that this is a stream. And to now we to see the categories information, of course, we have to print it, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I can uh, do it here. So as this is a stream, we will use something known as a sync pipe, and we will just convert this to JSON to see the actual information. So you see we are getting error on both the lines. So we are getting error on async and we are getting error on JSON. Because we are using standalone component, we have to import them as well. And to the simplest thing to do is just use common module. So I can Angular core and say go ahead and use common module. Why it is not coming? Because it's from Angular common. That's why. So we have to say import from Angular slash common. And we can just import common module. But there is a better way. I mean, there is another way which I think it's always okay to import common module, but you may say, okay, you mentioned that modules are going to be deprecated and we should write a code without common modules, without modules, ng modules, but it's not going to be like removed, right? So this common module actually imports all this functions, which is a sync pipe, JSON. These are actually pipes. We'll talk about pipes later on, but these all pipes are actually available as part of common module. But as Angular is like going into a direction where modules are optional, you can just import the sync pipe and JSON pipe. So that's also possible. So I can say this, I just need a sync pipe and I just need JSON pipe. And rather than importing common module here, I can just import these two values, which is not going to save you much. I mean, if you think about your bundle size, it's not going to like reduce a lot. But yeah, I mean, you just use what you need. uh, I mean, I'll still prefer using common module because these pipes are generally we use it all places, right? I mean, this common module also includes ngif, ng for, so all this information is part of common module. So rather than actually importing each and every single module, I will prefer common module. This is my personal choice. If you think that you want to import individual functions or individual pipes, just go ahead and do that. No one is stopping you. So let's see. I mean, we just make our first API call and let's see how our data looks like. So you can see there is something behind this. Let's increase this size. Let's cancel this. So you have electronics, jewelry, men's clothing, women's clothing. So all these categories, we just made our first API call and got our data from the backend. So yay, I mean, yeah, we made some progress, right? After 50 minutes, we are able to make an API call by adding we are still not using NgRx, so we just added those files, but we needed a service to make an API call, so that's why we added a service. And I wanted to show you how you can make an API call, so we just did that as well. Now let's add our effect. And so once we add effect, the developers will not use these services directly. They will be isolated. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll say category dot x dot ts. Similar to what we have seen so far. I mean, for everything there is an API. So of course, if you guessed it, you guessed it right, that there is an create effect API as well. I mean, you saw create action, saw create reducer, saw create selector. Now there is a create effect. So let's go ahead and do that, and we will again go to the our best friend, which is documentation. So for installation, of course, we know this. So let's see overview. So what we have to do is there is an example given where we do something similar, like we get the movie list. Then what we have category list. So it says, okay, you have to create a service. We created a service, and then we have to write our effect. So it says, okay, to create an effect, you can have either functional effects or you can have class based effect. So what should we do? I mean, let's do both. Why not, right? I mean, I have not written functional effects so far. So I'll also get a practice, and you also know about both of the ways how you can write an effect. So to create an class based effect, so let's follow this. So we have to create an injectable, and we have to export class category effect. And we need constructor where we inject our service, because now we will not make an API call directly from our component, but we will make it inside from the effects. So I'll say, okay, this is private read only, and category service, which is type of category service. And we need to have a function. So like this, so we can say this is load categories, and this will be an stream, right, as we saw so far. And then we need to have actions. So we need to import the actions. Let's do that as well. So we have actions, create effect, which is our create effect method, and then we are going to use off type. I mean, we'll see how to use it. So we need to inject the actions as well. So we have actions. This is actions. I will talk about it, what these actions are, once we complete our effect. So the setup part may seem boring, but we have to do this anyways. And then here we'll say what kind of or what type of action you want to handle here. So we are saying that, okay, I want to actually handle categories. Let's say this one, category get categories. And here we will use any of the operators. So you can see we have exhaust map here. So let's go ahead and use exhaust map. I'll just copy the same example because our example is pretty similar to what is here. So we have pipe, um, and I think we just missing closing somewhere, and we also missing import. So I'll just import exhaust map, and then I'll say this is categories, and then we call all get categories. So categories, and once we have our data, we have to do some operations. So let's see. I'll just add all the missing imports first and make sure that everything works. And what is expected? Where is the comma? Where is the comma? Mm, So this closes here. This and this should close here. and then we have this one, and then there's one more. So I have this bracket pair called colorizer enabled, which is available in VS Code as well. You can see if your brackets are matching or not. Very safe way, right? So once we have our data, so this is our success scenario. This is our failure scenario. So in case I get my data, I have to make an I have to call another action. So that action is this one, get a category success, right? But why to write it, right? Why to write it manually? So you can also pass the actions here. So I can import. So let's see, we can just copy it from reducer. I mean, we already did this here. So we'll go to effects and add the same imports. So I'll say, okay, in case of type category, get category category actions, we should actually make it as get category uh, rather than get category actions, right? So I'll say this. Let's change this right now. Get categories. Then let's change it in the reducer. I mean, we don't need it here, so we can remove it. We need it here. Get categories actions. So we say, okay, in case this action is raised, so handle this action. And here we can say we have to make an API call here, so we can, let's see where it ends. We need success. And here we have to pass the categories. So I'll call it as categories, and we will pass this categories to this function. And for similarly for error, I'll pass failure, and we'll say, okay, not here, but we'll pass an empty for as of now. So this is the effect. So this actually handles the API call, and in case we get the data, it will just update the store. I mean, it will raise another action, and this action needs to be handled by a reducer. So if you see, we already have handled our category action success and failure. So in case there is any error, we will get the error information. In case we get the categories, we get the categories. So we also have our effects now. So let's see how to actually combine all this together. I mean, we have been writing code for close to 1 hour right now. I mean, this is the initial investment which you have to make into NgRx. So initially, you may think your team is a little bit slower because you have to do all this code. I mean, probably it is taking too much time, but it pays off in the future, right? I mean, your how your data flows inside your application. So let's go ahead and connect all this together now. So we need all these files to be available outside. So we'll start exporting each and every file. So I'll say this is category. So there are different map operators, Aniket. I mean, I'll talk about it later on probably. Let's finish this today, and then we'll have probably an NgRx session as well. Or if you want, you can just go to my Angular course, which is available on Free Code Camp, and I have already covered all this map operators there as well. So effects and reducer, so action effects reducer, and then we also need selector. So all this file are exported. Let's go ahead and use them. So into our configuration, we have our store. So you can see we can pass a reducer here. So I can say reducer and array. No, so I can do something like this. let's import. So we already have our library from category, and we need our reducer category reducer. So this is our reducer, and then in effects, we will pass the effect which we have created, category effects. And okay, so far, what we have done is we are just connecting this together. So right, we wrote our action effects, reducers, effects. So let's compile it together and let's see if still works. I mean, I just don't want to see anything else. I just want to make sure that our application still works, and it does. So we are not breaking anything so far. Let's go ahead and use this store to get the data now. So the first thing which we have to do is we have to make an call to get the categories, which we can do from our main page, right? I mean, from our initial component, which is our component.ts. So we get all the categories which are available. So here, what we can do is rather than doing category service.get categories directly, we can have selector. So we have, if you remember, we have actions and selectors, and we can make an selector. Sorry, we can make an action call to get the data, which will do something like this. So let's go ahead and see that how to dispatch an action, because basically we have to dispatch an action at this time. So if you go to action and yeah. So you can see to dispatch an action, we generally do this. We call the store API, sorry, store method, and then or we just use the store API to dispatch an action. So if you see, and then to select, if there should be some selecting feature state, and then how to use it in your component. It should be pretty much easy. Yeah. So you see here, you can inject the store, which I'm going to do now. Let's inject the store. You can also use inject as well. So let's do first constructor way. Let's remove this. Let's inject the store, and on init lifecycle hook. So has Angular component has lifecycle hook. So ng on init is the initialization lifecycle hook. So on init, we will we will dispatch an action to get all the categories. So let's take the action. So we have category get categories action here. So we'll dispatch this action, get categories action, which doesn't accept any data, right? I mean, if you see this action, just uh, there is no parameter required. And to get the categories now, we can take it from the selector which we have written. So let's see how to get the selector. So first, to get the selector, we have select function. So here I can say this dot store dot select, and then from this select I can just get, let's go to categories, and we need select categories. So I can say, okay, go ahead and select this one. Need to pass it like this. No, select select categories. State category state string is not assignable to state object of type string. String array. Yeah, I mean, this is okay. Let's see what is this. So this is string array, and why is this is giving me. What's wrong here? It says map function state string array is not available given the argument of is not assignable. Why? See, no. So dot select and don't need to pass. Hmm. Without the generic, the default generic applied is store t of object. Where what I am missing here? Create selector, state, state, and then state dot categories. What resetting? Okay, let me see an example from my old code to see what I'm missing here. Your repositories. And product. State. Okay, so selector. Okay, this is feature state. Okay, that's fine. But to use this, this is select and get product. Okay, I think interesting. It's the same. What's changed here? I have type. That's it. Let's see if I make it as observable of type string. Okay, still string array is not assignable. Type this. What's wrong here? So create selector and then let's try this way. Ah, okay, I'm missing create selector method. Oh my god, how I did that. Okay, so because these are not selectors, so create selector. I think I can just move this. Okay, create selector, and then what you have to do is I can select user. I can also do this. Okay, but it's okay. Create selector. Where is the code? Create selector, and then what I want to return state. Where is this? Yeah. So create selector, and then we have state, and this is the state. Why it is complaining about this? Yeah. So you can say create selector, then pass the set categories, comma, and I think it should be resolved now. I is no, it's not the way. It's the only way. Why? Create select category state. What's happening here? What I'm missing? Select, export, select categories. And I am doing the same here, selector state dot product and state dot categories. Port from this. NgRx store, select. My God, what's wrong here? If I see the documentation, select visible books, I mean, yeah, that's the same. Select, create selector and selector with properties, and then we can select this, select count. That's the only thing which we have to do. Why it's not working here? Something left. Oh, it's okay. I mean, I think I'll figure this out, and then we'll probably see it in next stream. I don't want to waste enough time online anyways. So in case you joined, I mean, I'll of course share what's the solution for this. I'm somehow missing something, maybe some keyword or something, but yeah, that's not a problem. Like configure, we tried to configure the NgRx store today, which we ended up being unsuccessful, but yeah, it's this is what life coding is. So you learn something new every day, and you make mistake as well. So thanks for joining. We'll see you again on Monday with this solution as well, of course, what went wrong here, and we'll continue with that. So we'll see the categories, we'll fetch the products using the categories. So we'll do all this starting Monday again. So same time, 10 p.m. as 10 p.m. CET, and we'll see you there. Bye bye.